Here's our agenda for today. You're going to spend about 20-ish minutes in your child or children's shoes this morning. Yes, you're going to be engaging in some mathematical thinking. So obviously, a typical math period is 60 minutes, so you'll experience an abbreviated class. And then we're going to take 5 or 10 minutes just to debrief. What was that? How did that feel? What did that sound like? What did this look like? How did this math experience compare to your own math experience as students? And then we're going to talk a little bit about, like, in the social media world, there's so much talk about new math, right? What does that even mean, right? What's the purpose of it? We're going to start to unpack that. And then finally, we're going to zoom out and think about how do all of these structures support upper school mathematics at Seacrest? And then we're going to end with how can I support my child at home, which in the upper school is very different than in secondary and primary, where you might be having a much more hands-on role. In the upper school, it's going to be a little bit different. Alrighty. So if you are standing in the back, please feel free to fill in some of the empty seats. You will need some desk space. I'm going to come around and just put some little mini packets at your table. You can go ahead and put your name and date at the top. So today, we're going to experience a 6th grade lesson, okay? And we're going to start to decompose and rearrange shapes to find their areas. That is the goal of today's mini class, okay? So we're going to start with a warm-up, which is how we start most periods, okay? So here, would anyone like to read our warm-up question out loud? Don't everybody volunteer all at once. Awesome, thank you.
Okay, comparing regions. Is the area of figure A greater than, less than, or equal to the area of the shaded region in figure B? Be prepared to explain your reasoning.
Do people understand what the question's asking, for the most part? All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put 2 minutes on my timer, and I want you just to silently, independently, record some of your thinking right on the paper. That could look like words, it could look like equations, you could be engaging in the model. So again, we have paper here for you. This is not a mental math activity, okay? And as you're doing that, I will be floating around. So just as a reminder, mathematical thinking can look many different ways. This could involve equations, this could involve some just word statements, some if-then statements. And I imagine with this particular lesson especially, as we're looking at area models, you might want to be engaging in the model. That could look like arrows, it could look like circling and moving things around, it could look like labeling dimensions. I don't know. Just show me with your fingers how many more independent minutes you'd like. 0, like you're ready to talk to someone next to you. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Love to see fingers from everybody. Okay, awesome. And if you just trickled in, feel free to take some more independent think time. If you're ready to share, why don't you share with someone at your table across next to you? I'll ask you not to share if you came with someone who you're comfortable and already know. I'll ask you to take a little risk and maybe introduce yourself to someone you
Area is one side times the other, so this is definitely a bigger area. Rose's class, so they're all like 2 inches on the same side. And that little thing is like half an inch.
Awesome.
Yeah, the whole area is just on top of it.
So you can cut out that little square.
I
very much enjoyed walking around and listening and looking at people's annotations and hearing different people's thoughts. Before we hear a couple ideas, I just want to do a quick poll of the class. Okay? So if you thought the area of figure A was greater than figure B, could you put your thumb up? If you thought the area was less than figure B, put your thumb down. Or if you thought the areas were equivalent, you could put your thumb sidiways. So I just want to do a quick pulse check here. Ooh, interesting. So we have a beautiful mix of different ideas. Okay, you can go ahead and put your thumbs down. Would somebody like to share the reasoning as to why they believe? Let's start with greater than or less than. So I felt like, would anyone like to talk about the reasoning for that? Don't everybody volunteer all at once.
Volunteer.
Alright.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, well, so comparing our own pot, I had to put numbers to it. So
Great.
I like subdivided like a 10 by 10 square.
So in
they
your
put
mind-
the vertical and the horizontal.
Of course, it's not letting me annotate. Let me refresh for a moment. Thank you for your patience, just like your children. Technology giveth, technology taketh away. Alright, hopefully now it's more. Oh, of course not anymore. So I'm going to do a super quick model here. So you're saying you attributed, you just,
The horizontal and the vertical to 10.
a 10? And you did that with both figures?
Yes.
Cool. And how did that help you think
And
make this
then
comparison?
so for B, I saw a void of like a 2 by 2. So, and then in addition, so here's my subtraction.
So you're saying this was also 2 by 2 in your mind? Gotcha. And your final thought was these areas was one greater than the other?
Yeah, after you dealt with what B, what the math was for B, with the addition and subtraction.
Good, so could I ask you, how did you use addition and subtraction to help you here?
So I first said A is equal to 10 by 10, so 100 units. And then B is equal to 100 minus a 2 by 2.
So 10 times 10, which should be 100, minus 2 by 2.
And then added the 2 by 2 to negate
Ah, so you subtracted this,
that out.
and then you added
and
this
added
back.
that in.
So, if you were to follow this out, how would these areas compare if you had 100 minus this 4 here, and then adding this 4 back?
Then we're
So you believe that they were equivalent. Is that what you're saying? Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing your reasoning. Anybody think about this in a different way? Do you mind sharing?
You want me to share?
Yeah, please. I want to hear some different perspectives.
I'm probably the least mathy person in the room, for sure, and far more of a business person that would hire a math person to do this. But I think it's greater because the sides are extended. So I just assumed that the space in the middle would no longer be counted because it was outside of the box. So it's just blank. It's just not there anymore. And that because it extends these extra sides, that the area itself would be greater. And I didn't make any assumption that you had to minus out this, because it just, the perimeter is bigger, so therefore the area is bigger.
Oh, could you make that statement one more time? That's very thought-provoking. Could you say that one more time about area and
The
perimeter?
area was just bigger, without regard to the missing structure. So I assumed the perimeter and the area was therefore bigger.
If the perimeter of a figure
Right.
is larger
But you don't have to minus this out, it's just
Then
the shaded
the
area.
area-
It's just the shaded area. You're not
would also be larger.
It's like the calculus of the area of curve.
class anything.
So this is a beautiful statement, and this is what in the math science world we would call a conjecture, right? So
Is that bad?
the if-then sentence frame is really powerful, right? So if we had more time, I would absolutely kind of go down and dive into this conjecture. Did I anticipate as a teacher as this coming up? Not necessarily. I know area and perimeter are obviously related and can sometimes be a point of confusion among students who are grappling with linear dimensions, right, on the outside versus two-dimensional space on the inside, this is a very thought-provoking statement. Thank you so much. So, for the sake of time, we're going to move forward. But I just want to kind of highlight and zoom out and just think about like the beauty of this warm-up. Why do you think that there were no numbers given on these models? Because that was absolutely intentional. What do you think is the difference? Yeah.
So there's more interpretation possible? Less concrete evidence?
Exactly. This becomes much less quantitative and around calculating and number crunching and much more about reasoning, right? And this becomes a lot more open-ended and very rich for discourse, right? If I gave you clear measurements here, this idea, I would imagine, would not have come up because you could have calculated this and proven it yes or no, one way or the other. Right, so what we're going to do now is our first activity. I'm just going to do a quick time check. So this activity is on the bottom half of your first slide. It's called On the Grid. So each grid square is one square unit, and your job is to find the area in square units of the blue shaded region. And the goal here is not to count individual unit squares, right? The grid there is a support, it's a scaffold. You could absolutely count by ones here, okay? But the goal is not to do that. The goal is to figure out other ways that would be more efficient to find the area. And as you notice, counting individual unit squares, that strategy could be effective with figures A and B, but as you come to figures C and D, that strategy may not be as useful. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put around 5, and again, if we had a full period, I would give you a bit more time, but let's start with around 5-ish minutes. And I'd encourage you to work with someone at your table to do this, okay? Please engage in the models. Again, this is not a mental math activity. How could you find the area of these figures?
Oh yeah, I like that.
Alrighty, wow, it was so exciting for me to float around and hear the wide range of different approaches to these very interesting problems. So in exhibit, part of my role is, right, we can't talk about everything. How can we maximize the short time we have together in 60 minutes? So for this activity, let's just take a few minutes and focus on figures C and D. We're not going to talk about A or B. And as technology is taking away my ability to annotate, it's also giving an opportunity. So what we do is pivot here. So what I would love, if anyone would love to come up, and what we can do is you can physically take your sheet and bring it under our document camera, and that way everyone can see your thinking without me having to annotate and recreate it like I did with the warm-up. So, do I have any brave volunteers who would love to share their thinking for figure C or D? Thank you. Come on up. All right, so your job is to, one, we're not going to judge right now, like, oh, is this right, is this wrong, is this accurate or inaccurate? Our job is to simply understand this person's thinking. And you can say, ooh, did I think about this problem this way? Did I have a different approach? And then we'll ask someone else to come share their thinking. So go ahead, you have the floor.
Okay, so I tried to determine if I could figure out any part length or break up any of the squares in any way. So in D, I found that there was a place where I could do one block here, and then the middle of this went from the one corner here to the top corner there, which meant that that was going to be 2, because it was going to bisect
Good, let me
the
just
area.
zoom in a tiny bit more because I want to make sure everybody can see. And then focus going. Yay.
Oh, that's better.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
And so then I asked Ted if he knew if he remembered the equation for how to get the hypotenuse, and he did, which was great.
If you want to stand here, it would be more natural for you to write if you want to.
No, I'm not gonna write it,
Oh,
you can
okay.
move it over.
Cool.
So he reminded me that that was a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And so then I determined that a was the bottom, and that was 1. And then the other one, technically, actually, as I do this, it's not actually 2, but it's close. That's also the hypotenuse. But then that would be c squared. So roughly c squared came out to be a little more than 2. So c would be a little greater than 2. For intents and purposes. And then because my phone doesn't do square so we just had to kind of like ballpark it. So at that point, we determined that area was, so each of these, if this was going to be a little greater than 2, and this was going to be a little greater than 2, then it was probably going to be about 5-ish or 4-ish. So we went with 4, greater than 4. So that was my greater than 4. And then that put that at roughly 16 or greater than 16, which made this 36 minus roughly greater than 16. But without official numbers on that, it was a ballpark answer at best. But that was my thought process.
Thank you so much for sharing. Does anybody have comments, questions about this strategy? Did you want to say something? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so we were discussing this, and one of the things we got out of it is that we could calculate the gray shaded area on the C part, on the C diagram, and then so we could calculate the little triangles that are around the square on its side, sort of. And then we could also get the area of the square that's the gray shaded area in C, and subtract the area of the triangles around the side, and then get the area in D.
Oh.
I don't know if you see what I mean.
Wait, do you mind, could I mark on your paper?
Yeah, absolutely.
Subtract. So you are noticing a relationship.
Hey, we all have our strengths. I'm sure he turns.
So Jen made that proposal actually of doing the subtraction, and that kind of lit up a light bulb, and it was like, oh, you're onto something. And because I was busy trying to figure out the areas of the little triangles in C by doing like one side by the other and dividing by 2. That's, so you get the area of like the assumptive rectangle divided by 2, and you get the areas of the little triangles around the, in the diagram C, and then if you subtract those areas, you get the area of D.
Wow. So we could call that like superimposing, right? It's almost like I'm going to create another shape outside of that given figure,
Yeah, exactly.
and then compensate for that extra space that doesnp belong by subtracting.
Yeah.
Wow. Raise your hand. I think a couple other people had a similar approach. Pretty cool. Well, I'm just looking at the clock, and I could do this happily for hours. It sounds like many of you could as well. Maybe more than you anticipated at first. Could you go ahead and just flip to the back side of this? The back of page 1, so it would be side 2. So this would be if we had a full period. What's different about the follow-up activity?
Measurements.
There's given measurements, and what else? What don't you have?
Right angles.
Ah, you do not have that coordinate grid behind you, right? So this idea of that grid served as a mathematical scaffold, right? It allowed us to really have a range of geometric approaches to this problem. Whereas if I had given this to you first, my gut is maybe a lot of people would have kind of reverted to a formula. Maybe, area of a triangle is half base times height. right? So this idea of providing this much more open task at first, and again, we didn't even get through all the different strategies, but we found, somebody tapping into some Pythagorean theorems knowledge, some superimposing and subtracting. And then if you flip to side 3, there's a little summary, and we're not going to go through this now, but you're going to take these with you when you leave. And if you'd like to delve a little bit deeper, this really summarizes, again, this is not including every approach, but these are 3 different and equally valid approaches to thinking about the area of these more complex figures. So I believe like decomposing, right? So for figure A, breaking that like L shape into rectangles and then putting them back together. I saw a lot of people thinking about if I were to move the triangles around, I could reflect or rotate them to create a rectangle, which is easier to work with, right? And then thinking about subtracting that missing piece, okay? And if you were to flip to the very last side, again, we're not going to do this today, but I want to give you the full sense of a complete math lesson. You'll notice on the back is what we call in cool down. So this is like an exit ticket. So this is only one really fantastic component of this program, is this allows students and teachers to give and receive feedback on a near daily basis, right? And at first, so I'll tell you straight up, some of our new 5th graders, right, this year, the first time they have cool downs, oh yeah, there's definitely an adjustment, there's definitely an anxiety, that's normal. But now, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, you would be so surprised, kids crave feedback, right? Like kids are gonna be upset today because I was finalizing this workshop. I didn't get a chance to score their cool downs yesterday. So you're gonna have to wait one whole day, right? But it's amazing, they crave this, right? They can go to look in the grade book, right? It's a great way for them to see, how am I doing, right? Instead of waiting 6 weeks for a summative assessment, and then it's like, oh, too late now, right? So again, this is how we inform our practice on a daily basis. So, the math experience for today has concluded, so you can exhale, those of you who had to lean into this discomfort. And now we're going to zoom out for a moment. Just take a couple minutes. What did math class look like today? Like, what are some things you saw, either on the board, on your paper? What did you see people doing? Just describe. Like, what did this look like? Because I imagine it maybe didn't look the same as when I was in math class.
Collaborative.
Discussion.
People working together, right? Collaborative. What else?
Not singular in approach.
Multiple approaches and entry points.
No answer key.
Say that again?
No answer key.
Less, or let's say in this instance, no focus on the quote-unquote right answer.
Yes.
Right. And again, of course, kids do need, if we had more time, we would go back and dive in and be like, okay, this is an approximation, is this accurate? We would actually compare the accuracy of all these different strategies, and we'd see that all of the final answers are equivalent, right? So again, we would do that afterwards. And what did it sound like? Was it quiet in here? Were people right? Was it like me talking over everyone, and it's like silent crickets in here? But what was the kind of atmosphere?
More than pencil lead.
Say that again?
More than pencil lead.
I love that, more than pencil lead. Right, and we had, it was really hard for me to get everyone's attention. Right? Because everyone was talking.
Everyone was engaged.
Right? Exactly, right? So again, oftentimes, traditionally, talking in class has this negative association, and now it is absolutely the opposite. We want kids talking. And then this, I think, is the most interesting. How do you feel now compared to when you first came in, and then some people saw me handing out packets and what were some of the emotions that came up during this experience?
Let's go.
There was a little bit of anxiety at first. And then maybe that became a little more excitement. I think maybe some curiosity. Yeah, right? Ooh, like how did this person think about that? Ooh, I didn't think about it that way. How did they come up with that, right? So again, mathematics in particular, kids typically and teachers as well, we feel like these wave of emotions, right, in a given period, which is totally natural. So when we think about like new math, like what does that mean? Like why did I structure the lesson this way? What would be the difference between me putting up equations and telling you A equals the area of a triangle is half base times height? Go ahead and do that now for all of these. Right? Like what is different about this approach?
Not everybody's the same. So you're able to touch the entire class instead of just those that learn that way.
Yeah. All students able to access the mathematical ideas.
You're trying to learn how to problem solve versus just solving for something.
Developing problem solving skills. Right? Like I didn't tell you what to do and how to do it. I said, here's an experience. What are you going to do? Right? So as teachers, sometimes we refer to this as kind of like the upside down model, where instead of like a teacher shows everything first and then you replicate it, it's the total opposite. Where you show what you can do first, we share it and unpack it, and then my job is to simply kind of guide, facilitate, and kind of connect all the pieces for kids so that they can see, oh, this relates to this and this way and this way. All right? So the idea here is, and this is a term that teachers use, and you may have heard this before, but we call this productive struggle. Right? So what are you producing in this? Like, what are you producing? What is productive about this?
Thinking.
Yeah.
Due process.
Right? You start to develop these habits of mind, right? Perseverance. You're visualizing, right? You're making sense of your and others' ideas. Right? So these are things I love and kids will very often ask around middle school and high school, what is the point of this? When am I going to use this? Let's just be real. When am I going to use this in real life? And the reality is, most of us may not be actually applying the specific concepts that you've learned in school to your daily life, unless you're me. Right? Unless you're a math teacher, right? But the idea here is no matter what field you pursue, everybody needs these habits of mind and everybody needs problem-solving skills, right? So that is really the heart of mathematics in the STEM world, is we need to support innovative thinkers, not people who can replicate formulas and just do what they're told, right? The world is very complicated and we have a lot of complex issues to solve. So, how do the structures and our upper school mathematics program support the goals of this new math or productive struggle? So, Michelle and I and all of the members of the math team, 2 years ago? We piloted different aspects of a couple different programs. And we found that illustrative mathematics was hands down the best fit for us for many reasons. But predominantly, it's this aligned philosophy and vision of having kids do all the thinking, right? That's the goal. If kids aren't thinking, they're not learning, right? And the best part about this is it's actually the curriculum itself is so high quality and powerful that teachers are going to ebb and flow, right? There's going to be always teacher turnover, right? Life happens. So it really supports teacher development, teachers that are currently working here, right? As well as future faculty that will onboard when that time comes. And then another addition that we're super excited about the math program that we piloted last year is this idea of mathematical pathways. And this is something we're super excited about because it's unfixed and responsive. So last year we've had multiple students change pathways over the summer. We had a student change pathways in the first 6 weeks of this school year. So I want to be very clear, this does not in any way, shape, or form mirror like the tracking system, right? Where it's like, oh, when I was in 4th grade, I was in this math track, and that was my math track through 12th grade. And that was who I was known as, right? I'm like, oh, you're in that group. right? Absolutely not. And the reason we have these pathways is because it's based on kids' cognitive, social, and emotional maturity, which all develop, as you know, at very different times and speeds, right? And that's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just the reality, right? So our job is not to pigeonhole or force someone and say, you are this old and you are in this grade, you should be ready for this. If you're not ready, you're not ready, right? And the thing about constructing mathematical ideas is it takes weeks, months, years to develop deep understanding of a lot of concepts, right? So this idea that the breadth and depth of content knowledge of each kid is different, right? So we like to think of this as the learning zone, right? So a lot of you, when I started handing out these packets, you probably went to the panic zone for a second. Oh my God, I have pencil, paper, I have to do math, oh my God. And then as you saw the warm-up, right, I think a lot of us started to get into our learning zone. We're like, ooh, okay, I can do this, right? I'm not quite sure how I want to do this yet, but I can do this, right? And then the other is the comfort zone, where imagine that, I think we've all been that student. Like, when do kids act out? When they're bored out of their minds because they're not stimulated cognitively, or they're so frustrated that they can't even access it, right? So this idea, our job is for kids to be living in their learning zone. Again, nothing's perfect, so I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but I would say 85 to 90% of the time, right? And what's another addition this year is that the largest math classes in the upper school are co-taught with me and one of the other current math teachers, which has been such an amazing experience. And again, this is perfectly aligned with our theme for this year of putting students at the center. So in these larger groups, the teacher-student ratio, I think across the board in every math class is like 10 kids per teacher, which is absolutely unreal. Like, you go to a lot of schools and it's like 30 to 1. We're in 10 to 1, and we know with math, we need that small ratio so we can really support individual kids. So that allows us to do half groups, small groups, and one-on-one time to really ensure that kids are in their learning zone as much time as possible during a given day. And then this idea, I love this, I don't know if you've seen this visual before, but to me this is a great way to think about pathways, right? If we're saying like, oh, you're in this grade level, you should all be in the same class learning the same thing because you all know the exact same thing on September 1st when we start school, right? That assumption is just simply inaccurate and unproductive, right? Whereas some kids may need a different pathway to help them get to their learning zone, be able to see that baseball game, right? Without having to be in their frustration zone because, oh, I want to see the game, but I can't, right? Really cool. This is just a little snapshot, and again, remember, this is just one data point, but one of the really cool things about the MAP test is that it's not just nationally taken, it's internationally taken. So if you take a look at the bottom, you'll see kind of a color key. So kids in blue are performing higher than 80% of people of kids in the world. Kids in the green are performing 60 or 80, or performing better than 60 to 80% of students in the world. Yellow, I call it around 50%. This is 20 to 40% of the world, and then first to 20th. So just by looking at the colors, like, what are some of your initial observations? Like, how are we comparatively to the rest? So again, this is just one data point, but what are some of your initial observations?
It all looks pretty good. It improves as you go up.
Yeah, right? Third graders, that's the first time they've ever taken a standardized digital test ever in their lives. They're 8 years old. So again, all of this is gonna improve just with more test taking experience, right? And then oftentimes what's been great is when our enrollment is up across the entire school. But again, when kids are coming from different places, oftentimes like someone who may be high achieving in one setting, right, depending on the philosophies and quality of instruction, that may be different in another setting. So again, it takes some kids time to kind of acclimate and get them up to speed. But again, this is just something, a really quick snapshot that I think shows us just in like, this is what, year 2 of our pathways, and we're already seeing dividends in the short term.
great, we sat with the math team to look at this is all from the fall assessment data, but we are seeing trends of growth across the board. So just important to note for some of those orange and red kids, there are kids, we have a number of kids with diagnosed learning differences in our environment. So this Pathways is really making sure we're honoring both ends of the spectrum, but we were very pleased to see the movement. So if you think of yellow as being at grade level, green as being on the high end of the grade level, and blue being well above grade level, we're doing really well. And we've seen that shift happen in the 6th and 7th and 8th grade groups. They were all red last year when we started in the fall.
Yeah.
So we're not only seeing movement, but we're seeing actually that those colors slide down, as you can kind of see. So it was a really great opportunity for us to look and check ourselves, and this is a way that we help to monitor our program with a third-party sort of data source where we can benchmark against how we're performing.
You said that you went to the illustrative math over the last 2 years. Is the data showing from the illustrative math has changed? Is that dramatic? Is it improved compared to where you were with the math?
Yeah, so we measure it from the students' knowledge is improving, so therefore we look at our instruction and say, okay, this is working if kids are growing their competency over time, which is what we want to be able to see. So that's been a really great trend for us as a school. And again, honoring the fact that we do serve a wide range of learners. So we really are trying to be creative about the way working with Stephen and the math team has been amazing, because the math lab, whether you have a student who's benefiting from that math lab, small group, extra instruction, we're really trying to be responsive to students in this process. But you can see how even within the math pathways, there is a range of learners. And so the approach and what you experienced this morning, some of you sat at a table with an engineer. I know who my engineers are, and got a little sweaty looking at their processes, but you can see how students model this sort of discourse, and I can't say enough how important, I know it seemed like a minor thing, those cool downs are. It was one of the primary reasons we chose this program. Is I grew up, and you probably grew up as well, with math very from the top down math instruction, and you didn't really know if you knew a concept until you took the final test. And it was summative, and we call those the postmortem. Great to know after oh, that was great to know that I didn't understand that, but now we're moving on to the next unit, and that's not really going to help me move forward, because we know math spirals. So you go through the fractions, and oh, next year they come up again. So we really want to make sure that kids are getting a strong foundation, and having a pulse check every single day to assess where kids are at and their understanding is a hugely powerful tool and a routine for them that's helping them to rethink what it means to be assessed. See the value of checking in on yourself. So those conceptual check-ins are hugely powerful in being able to drive instruction. And then we sit as a team and say, you know what? Looking at these cool downs, maybe we need to slow down and spend another week on this concept because we're seeing this trend. Or maybe kids are really performing strongly. Let's compact some of this. Let's not spend too much time here, because if they've got it, we can spend a little time later on. So that's a really powerful piece of that. Very different than I think how most of us experience math instruction.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. We're just looking at the clock, and I know our kids will be bounding down the hall in a couple minutes. So in terms of support at home, what does that look like as an upper school parent? So let's start with the do's. Again, positive encouragement is never a bad thing. So reinforcing this value of growth mindset and the development of grit and perseverance, and the importance of mistake making. Perfection is never the expectation or the goal for anybody. If you, again, the math team and I, we work diligently to, again, make sure kids are spending as much time as possible in their learning zone, but nothing's perfect, and we can't anticipate everything. So if you ever notice, like, oh, my child has been really frustrated with homework this week, please reach out and let us know, okay? And again, this is more just a learning behaviors thing. The older kids, again, have more experience with this, but remember, Behaviourly is a great tool just to make sure you're keeping up with your assignments. And we ask very kindly that you don't teach the strategies you learned or your strategies. When your child inevitably will come up to you and say, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, I don't get it. Can you help me? And you're like, well, I can do this. Procedures will come, but it's our job, like let us determine how it happens, right? Because we're always gonna connect it conceptually and when it happens, right? There's infinite research saying once a procedure is learned, you can't actually understand like the why behind it unless you learned it before. So again, there are procedural understandings, that is a part of mathematics, but it has to come at the end once that understanding has been constructed. Also, we ask that you please don't act as the primary communicator between your student and their teacher, right? They need to start to advocate, and they can always just tell them, hey, did you email your teacher? Did you go to study hall? Did you go to math lab? Did you talk to them at break or recess? They know we're in school all day, every day. And please, again, related to this frustration zone, we want you don't have as much time at home with your kids as we do, actually. So we want all of the time that you have to be really positive, right? Like we know homework is something that can really negatively dominate like a dinner table and ruin the whole night. No, just don't allow that to happen. Just redirect them to reach out to us and then enjoy family time together because that is critically important. Yes.
One question
Please.
on the don'ts,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is, I believe in positive struggle as well with our kids, and when my kids come to me to help with their work, I want to be there for them.
Yeah.
I don't want to say, well, your teacher told me not to,
Yeah.
or like, oh, everything's good, I don't want you to struggle, like, oh, I just want things to be positive. Like, having a little struggle that you work through with your kids, I believe is a healthy parent-child relationship.
Absolutely.
On things. So finding that balance in zone, do you have any like strategies for sort of saying this is the zone to stay in for the healthy struggle where you're really substantively interacting with your kids and not just like, well, I'm leaving that to the teacher.
Yeah. Now, let me give you a couple of useful questions. Like, what makes you think that?
Yeah.
Right, you're probing into their reasoning. What do you already know that can help you with this problem? So this, I agree with everything you're saying, and I think the kinds of questions that we ask can work to support that productive struggle and also have kids start to activate prior knowledge and make connections, right? Which is exactly what we do here in class.
Can I do a follow-up to
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Is there like, because I refer to my notes and everything, because I can't remember anything, I have worse memory. Is there something that the kids also have as a tool to refer to instead of just their, because I notice in my kids the same thing.
That's
I don't know what I learned today.
yeah, let me make a note of that. That's a great idea in terms of like, if you're stuck, what are some questions you could ask yourself?
Yeah.
Is that kind of what
Well,
you're
and
getting
also,
at?
is there like a document or?
Where can you reference the material, the learning?
Yeah, how
Where
do
can
you
you
reference
re-reference
what
the
Where's the
learning?
book?
learning? Yeah, without like, not like, I know it's not procedural, but is there also something?
Yeah, so
to
we have study guides which we give before big assessments, so I think in terms of the conceptual piece, that may be, I think, what you're getting at. And they have all their classwork available for them all the time. But then I think this idea of like, what are helpful questions I could ask myself, I think feels like something different. So let me think more about that.
I think the classwork is what you're saying, but it's here, right? It's not at home. So
Ah,
like if
so,
they're
like,
at
having
home
kids bring-
struggling
Yeah.
and they're not in their frame of mind to
That's a great point.
get
yeah.
their knowledge and whatever they've
Yeah,
learned.
bring your math binder home.
Well, it is a very specific follow-up to that is like studying for tests. Like, do you provide strategies with the kids? Because we're like, both my wife and I are kind of like anal and just like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
you gotta study for your test, you gotta study for your test. And they're like, my son's like, I don't know how to study for a test. Like, oh yeah, I did that.
Yeah, so
Like, it feels like very sort of free-floating. We're like, no, you're not studying for the test.
that's a great
So like,
question.
how, at this level and with your program, how do you expect them to study for a test?
That's a great question. So built into the study guides are practice problems directly representative of the key topics in that. And there's answer keys there. Yes, there are answer keys. So that they can check their work. And then I would say going through reviewing all their cool downs and their mid-unit assessments. So the great thing right behind Michelle is their portfolios. So a really important part of this is like when they, to help them study, I say go to your portfolio and grab all the cool downs from this unit and grab this mid-unit assessment. And because kids make revisions of all their cool downs,
Yep.
they're getting kind of like circling back and closing that loop when they've made errors.
So what would you consider a thorough preparation for a test for kids at this
I would
level?
say at this age,
Yeah.
completing the practice problems on that study guide, I think is a great starting point. But I think you broach a really great question that I think we can think about as a whole upper school is like, how do we go about studying for exams, right? And we have our first, I think, finals week coming up now that we've moved to this semester model in January. So that's something we're definitely gonna think a lot
And
about.
we're working on that. 'Cause
Okay.
It's actually, we want them
That's
to
a
have
great
those study
question.
skills. We've sort of framed it into, so he doesn't realize he's studying, but he is, because we're making him every day check in on his understanding, which again is a little different model. But when they do the practice problem, the study guide problems, the important part is when you don't know how to do a problem,
Yeah.
to pay attention to that. So we're trying to teach that metacognitive, that there may be, like, I got 75% of this, like this. I remember it, I retained it. But there were a couple of problems I struggled with. What are you gonna do about that? Are you gonna go check in with the teacher? Are you gonna attend the math lab session? How are you going to, because when they get to high school and college, there will always be study guide sessions, and you've gotta know.
Thank you all so much for coming. Sorry to have you.
Thank you.